Steve Harvey had been hosting Family Feud for over 13 years, and he thought he had seen everything the show could offer. He had witnessed unexpected answers, emotional victories, hilarious mistakes, and touching family moments. But on a warm April afternoon in 2024, during what seemed like a routine game between two families, something was about to happen that would bring the entire production to a complete halt. A 62-year-old woman named Patricia Morris was about to look into the studio audience during a commercial break and see a face she hadn't laid eyes on in 40 years, a face that belonged to someone she thought she would never see again, someone whose disappearance had shaped the entire course of her life. What would unfold in the next hour would leave Steve Harvey speechless, an entire studio in tears, and would prove that sometimes the most impossible reunions happen in the most unexpected places. Before we get into this extraordinary story, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss these incredible moments that remind us that miracles can happen when we least expect them. The Morris family stood on the Family Feud stage with the kind of comfortable confidence that came from being genuinely close, knit and supportive of one another. Patricia Morris, age 62, was a retired elementary school teacher with silver hair pulled back in an elegant bun and kind eyes that crinkled when she smiled. Beside her stood her daughter, Jennifer, age 40, a social worker who had clearly inherited her mother's compassionate nature. Jennifer's husband, Michael, age 42, their two teenage sons, Brandon, who was 17, and Tyler, who was 15, completed their 5-person team. They were competing against the Sullivan family from Boston, and the game had been filled with laughter, good-natured competition, and the kind of wholesome family energy that made Family Feud such beloved television. Patricia had been a Family Feud fan for decades, watching it religiously every evening after dinner, the same way she had done when her own children were young. When her daughter Jennifer suggested they apply to be on the show as a surprise for Patricia's upcoming 62nd birthday, the whole family had enthusiastically agreed. Getting selected felt like a dream come true for Patricia, who had told everyone at her retirement party 6 months earlier that appearing on Family Feud was on her bucket list. The Morris family had been doing well in the game, currently leading by a comfortable margin. Steve Harvey had been his usual charismatic self, joking with both families, making his signature facial expressions at unexpected answers, and creating an atmosphere that was both competitive and fun. He had taken a particular liking to Patricia, whose quick wit and warm personality made her a natural for television. During a commercial break in the middle of the 3rd round, Steve walked off stage for a moment to confer with producers. The families relaxed, chatting among themselves, waiting for taping to resume. The audience was buzzing with conversation, people shifting in their seats, some checking their phones, others talking to their neighbors about the game. Patricia, standing at the podium, stretched her back slightly and casually glanced out at the studio audience. It was something she had done several times during the taping, taking in the sea of faces, the bright lights, the surreal experience of actually being on the show she had watched for so many years. Her eyes scanned across the rows of people, not really focusing on anyone in particular, just taking in the moment. And then she froze. In the 4th row, slightly to the left, sat a man who looked to be in his mid-60s. He had gray hair, glasses, and a thin build. He was looking down at his phone, not paying particular attention to the stage at that moment. But something about his profile, the way he held his head, the distinctive shape of his nose and jawline, made Patricia's heart stop. Her hand flew to her chest. Her face went completely white. She took a step back from the podium, nearly stumbling. Jennifer, her daughter, immediately noticed. Mom, what's wrong? Are you okay?" But Patricia couldn't speak. She was staring into the audience with an intensity that was almost frightening, her mouth opening and closing but no sound coming out. Her whole body had started trembling. Michael, her son-in-law, grabbed her arm to steady her. "Patricia, sit down. You need to sit down." He tried to guide her to a chair, but she resisted, still staring into the audience. "Mom, you're scaring me," Jennifer said, her voice rising with panic. "What is it? What's wrong?" The commotion caught the attention of the production crew. A producer rushed over. "Is she having a medical emergency? Should we call for medical?" Patricia finally found her voice, but it came out as barely a whisper. Thomas! Oh my God! Thomas! Jennifer's face went from concern to shocked. What? Mom, what did you say? Thomas! Patricia repeated, louder now, her voice shaking. It's Thomas. He's here. He's in the audience. She raised a trembling hand and pointed directly at the man in the fourth row. Jennifer followed her mother's pointing finger, her own face going pale as she looked at the man her mother was indicating. Mom, that's not possible. It can't be him. It's been 40 years. It's him, Patricia insisted, tears now streaming down her face. I would know his face anywhere. I've dreamed about that face for 40 years. It's Thomas. It's my brother. The revelation sent shockwaves through everyone close enough to hear. Steve Harvey, who had just returned to the stage, immediately sensed something was very wrong. Whoa. What's happening over here? Patricia, you okay? Patricia turned to Steve, tears flowing freely now, her whole body shaking. Mr. Harvey, I need to talk to that man in the audience. That man right there in the fourth row with the gray hair and glasses. I need to talk to him right now. Steve looked confused but concerned. Ma'am, what's going on? Who is that? That's my brother, Patricia said, her voice breaking completely. That's my brother Thomas. I haven't seen him in 40 years. He disappeared when he was 22 years old, and we never knew what happened to him. We looked everywhere. We filed missing persons reports. We hired private investigators. We thought he was dead, and he's sitting right there in your audience. The studio went completely silent. Everyone had stopped what they were doing. The other family, the Sullivans, stood frozen. The audience members who could hear what was happening were turning to look at the man Patricia was pointing at. And Steve Harvey's face showed absolute shock. Stop everything, Steve said firmly to the production crew. Stop the cameras. Stop the game. This family needs to handle something right now. The man in the fourth row had finally looked up, alerted by the commotion and the fact that people were staring at him. When his eyes met Patricia's, his face went through a series of expressions: confusion, recognition, disbelief, and then pure shock. He stood up slowly, his phone falling from his hands onto his seat. Patty, he said, and even from the stage, his voice carried in the silent studio. Patty, is that you? Patricia let out a sound that was half sob, half gasp. Thomas. Oh my God, Thomas, it's really you. Steve Harvey, this man who had built his career on always knowing what to say, stood there completely speechless. Finally, he found his voice. Sir, can you come down here, please? I think we need to stop this game and let something more important happen. The man, Thomas, was already moving, pushing past other audience members to get to the aisle. He was crying too, his movements shaky and uncertain, like he couldn't quite believe what was happening. Patricia, unable to wait, stepped off the platform and started walking toward him, her family following close behind her, afraid she might collapse. They met in the middle of the studio floor, this elderly woman and this elderly man who hadn't seen each other since they were young adults. For a moment, they just stood there, staring at each other, decades of loss and questions hanging in the air between them. Then Patricia reached out a trembling hand and touched her brother's face, as if confirming he was real. Thomas, she whispered. Where have you been? What happened to you? We thought you were dead. Mom and Dad died thinking you were dead, and then they were holding each other, both of them sobbing, 40 years of grief and confusion and loss pouring out in that embrace. The entire studio was crying. Steve Harvey had tears streaming down his face. The camera operators, though they had been told to stop filming, couldn't help but capture this moment, knowing they were witnessing something extraordinary. Jennifer, Patricia's daughter, stood nearby with her hands over her mouth, staring at the uncle she had never met, the man whose disappearance had been a shadow over her entire life. Her mother had told her stories about Uncle Thomas, had shown her pictures, had explained how his vanishing had broken their family's heart, and here he was, alive, real, holding her mother like he would never let go. Steve Harvey finally approached them gently. I'm so sorry to interrupt, but can someone tell me what's happening? Can you help me understand this? Patricia and Thomas separated slightly, but kept holding each other's hands, like they were afraid if they let go, the other might disappear again. Patricia spoke first, her voice shaking but determined to get the story out. Thomas is my younger brother. In 1984, he was 22 years old, and I was 22. No, I was 22, he was 19. I'm sorry, I can't think straight. She wiped her eyes. He was 19 years old, just finishing college. He was brilliant, Mr. Harvey. He was going to be an engineer. He had his whole life ahead of him. She paused, struggling to continue. One day in March of 1984, he left our parents' house in Philadelphia. He said he was going to meet a friend, that he'd be back for dinner. He never came home. We waited and waited. We called everyone we knew. We called the police. They searched everywhere. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. We thought maybe he had been in an accident, or been the victim of a crime, or had amnesia. We looked for him for years, Mr. Harvey. We never stopped looking. Thomas was crying silently as his sister spoke. When she paused, he found his voice, though it was rough with emotion. Patty, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. What happened? Patricia asked, her voice desperate. Where did you go? Why didn't you come home? Why didn't you contact us? Do you know what it did to Mom and Dad? Do you know what it did to all of us? Thomas took a shaking breath. Can I sit down? This is a long story, and I'm not sure I can stand while I tell it. Steve immediately had chairs brought out onto the studio floor. The game was completely forgotten. This had become something else entirely, something more important than any television show. Patricia, Thomas, Jennifer, and Steve all sat in a circle while the rest of the Morris family and the entire studio looked on. Thomas began, his voice heavy with shame and regret. In 1984, I was 19 years old and I was gay, and I was terrified. Patricia's eyes widened. The revelation hit her like a physical blow. Thomas continued, I was growing up in a conservative Catholic family in Philadelphia in the early 1980s. Being gay wasn't just unacceptable, it was considered shameful, sinful, something that could get you disowned or worse. I had known since I was about 14, but I hid it from everyone. I was so scared, Patty, so scared of what would happen if anyone found out. He wiped his eyes. That day in March, I wasn't going to meet a friend. I was going to meet a man I had been secretly seeing. His name was David. We met at a coffee shop, and then we went for a walk in the park. And someone saw us. Someone from our church saw us holding hands, saw us kiss. They recognized me. Patricia was crying again, understanding now starting to dawn. 2 days later. Thomas continued, his voice breaking, I got a call from David. He told me that someone had come to his house, had threatened him, had told him that they were going to out both of us to our families, to our communities, to everyone. David was terrified. He came from a very strict religious family too. We were both so young, so scared, and we made a decision that I've regretted every single day for 40 years. He paused, struggling to get the words out. We ran. We packed what we could carry, pooled our money, and we left Philadelphia. We went to San Francisco because we had heard it was safer for people like us. We changed our names. We cut off all contact with our families because we were convinced that if we reached out, we would be forced to come home, forced to deny who we were, maybe even forced into conversion therapy, which was common back then. Thomas looked directly at his sister, his face etched with 40 years of guilt. Patty, I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I was protecting myself, protecting David, and in some twisted way, I thought I was protecting our family from the shame of having a gay son and brother. I thought that if I just disappeared, if you all didn't know the truth, it would be easier for everyone. I didn't understand then what I was doing to you, to Mom and Dad, to everyone who loved me. Patricia was sobbing, processing decades of grief in seconds. Thomas, we wouldn't have cared. We would have loved you no matter what. How could you think we would have rejected you? Because people did, Thomas said desperately. It was 1984, Patty! Gay men were dying of AIDS and people were saying it was God's punishment. Families were disowning their children. People were being beaten, killed. I was terrified, and I was 19 years old and stupid, and I made a terrible, terrible choice. Steve Harvey had been listening intently, and now he spoke. Thomas, what happened after you left? What have you been doing for 40 years? Thomas wiped his face and took a breath. David and I got to San Francisco. We struggled at first, working odd jobs, barely making rent. But we survived. We built a life together. I couldn't be an engineer like I had planned because I couldn't use my real identity, so I became a carpenter. David became a chef. We lived quietly, always afraid someone would find us, would force us to go back. He continued, after a few years, when nothing happened, when no one came looking for us in San Francisco, we started to relax. We built a good life, Mr. Harvey. We bought a small house. We made friends in the gay community there. We were happy, but there was always this shadow over everything. The guilt of what I had done to my family, the knowledge that my mother and father were probably still looking for me, wondering what happened, thinking I might be dead. Why didn't you reach out? Patricia asked, her voice a mixture of anger and desperate need to understand. Even years later, when things were safer, when society was more accepting, why didn't you contact us? Thomas's face crumpled with shame. Because I was a coward. Because the longer I waited, the harder it became. Because I convinced myself that you had all moved on, that reaching out would just open old wounds. And because I was ashamed, Patty. I was so ashamed of what I had done, of the pain I had caused. How do you come back from that? How do you show up after 40 years and say, sorry I let you think I was dead, but I was just too scared to be honest? He continued, tears flowing freely. And then the years kept passing. David and I were together for 35 years before he died 5 years ago from cancer. I took care of him until the end, and when he was gone I realized how alone I was. No family except the friends we had made. And I kept thinking about you, about Mom and Dad, about everyone I had left behind. Mom and Dad are gone, Patricia said quietly. Mom died in 1995, Dad in 2003. They never stopped looking for you, Thomas. They never stopped hoping you would come home. They died not knowing what happened to you, if you were alive or dead, if you had suffered, if you needed help. They died with broken hearts. Thomas let out a sound of pure anguish. I know. I didn't know, but I feared it. I'm so sorry, Patty. I'm so sorry for what I did to them, to you, to everyone. Steve Harvey spoke gently. Thomas, if you don't mind me asking, how did you end up in this audience today? That's a pretty incredible coincidence. Thomas gave a bitter laugh through his tears. It's not really a coincidence. I've been in Los Angeles for 3 years now. After David died, I couldn't stay in San Francisco. Too many memories. I retired, sold our house, and moved here to be closer to, well, I was trying to be closer to you, Patty, even if I didn't have the courage to contact you. Patricia looked stunned. You've been in LA for 3 years. I live in Pasadena. We've been 30 minutes apart for 3 years. Thomas nodded miserably. I know where you live. I found you online. I've driven past your house probably 50 times. I've sat in my car down the street, trying to work up the courage to knock on your door. But every time, I chickened out. What was I supposed to say? How was I supposed to explain 40 years of silence? He continued, I got tickets to Family Feud because I remembered when we were kids we used to watch game shows together. You always loved Family Feud. I thought maybe, in some pathetic way, sitting in the audience of a show you loved would make me feel closer to you. I never imagined you would actually be on the show. When they announced the Morris family from Pasadena, I thought it might be you, but I didn't let myself believe it, and then you walked out, and I saw your face, and it was like being transported back 40 years. You look so much like Mom, Patty. You look so much like her. Patricia was crying so hard she could barely speak. You've been stalking my house, driving past. Thomas, why didn't you just knock? Why didn't you call? Why didn't you reach out? Because I'm a coward, Thomas said desperately. Because I'm the man who abandoned his family for 40 years, and I didn't think I deserved forgiveness. Because I convinced myself you would hate me, you would slam the door in my face, and I would have deserved it. Jennifer, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. Uncle Thomas, I'm Jennifer. I'm your niece. You left before I was born, but I've heard stories about you my whole life. My mother named me after your middle name, Jerome. Jennifer and Jerome. She wanted to keep your memory alive even though she didn't know what happened to you. Thomas looked at Jennifer with wonder and fresh tears. You're Jennifer. Little Jenny, Patty, you were pregnant when I left. You were 8 months pregnant. You knew I was pregnant, Patricia asked. Of course I knew. I was going to be an uncle. I was so excited. And then I left and I missed everything. I missed your entire life, Jenny. I missed watching you grow up. I missed. He looked at the teenage boys standing nearby. Are those your sons? Jennifer nodded. Brandon and Tyler, your great-nephews. Thomas covered his face with his hands. I missed everything. I missed an entire lifetime because I was too afraid to be who I was and too ashamed to come home. Steve Harvey, who had been listening to this entire exchange with tears streaming down his face, finally spoke. I need to say something, and everyone here needs to listen. What we just witnessed is 40 years of pain, 40 years of misunderstanding, and 40 years of love that never died. He turned to Thomas. Sir, what you did leaving without a word, letting your family think you were dead, that was wrong. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. You made a choice that caused immeasurable pain. But I also need to say this: you were 19 years old, you were terrified, and you were living in a time when being gay could literally get you killed. You made a decision based on fear, and that fear was not irrational. Was it the right decision? No. But I can understand why a scared 19-year-old kid made it. He turned to Patricia. And you, ma'am, you spent 40 years not knowing what happened to your brother. You mourned him. You grieved him. Your parents died without answers. That pain is real, and it's valid, and nobody can take it away. Steve continued, his voice passionate. But here's the thing. You two are sitting here right now alive, on a Family Feud stage of all places, having found each other after 40 years. You have a choice to make right now. You can hold on to 40 years of hurt, or you can decide that the next 40 minutes, 40 days, 40 years, however long God gives you, are going to be different. You can decide that this impossible reunion is going to be the start of healing instead of just an opening of old wounds. He looked at both of them. Life is too short, and as we've just seen, life is too unpredictable to waste on grudges and fear. Thomas, you made a terrible mistake. Patricia, you have every right to be angry, but you're also siblings who loved each other once, and I'm betting that love is still there under all the pain. Patricia and Thomas looked at each other, and in that moment, something shifted. Patricia reached out and took her brother's hand. I'm angry, she said quietly. I'm so angry at you for what you did, for the years Mom and Dad spent searching, for the pain you caused. But Thomas, you're my baby brother. I loved you then, and somehow, impossibly, I still love you now. I don't know how we move forward from this. I don't know how we heal from 40 years of absence. But I know I don't want to lose you again. Thomas gripped his sister's hand like a lifeline. I don't deserve your forgiveness. I don't deserve another chance. But if you're willing to give me one, I promise I will spend whatever time I have left trying to make up for what I did. I can't give you back the 40 years, but I can give you the time we have left. They embraced again, and this time it felt different. Not just grief and shock, but the tentative beginning of healing. Steve Harvey stood up and addressed the studio. Ladies and gentlemen, we came here today to play Family Feud. We came here to have fun, to compete for prizes, to make some memories. But what we witnessed instead was a miracle. A family that has been broken for 40 years just took the first steps toward being whole again. That's more important than any game show. He turned to the producers. The Morris family wins. I don't care about the score. I don't care where we are in the game. They win. They get the $20,000. And they're getting more than that. Steve pulled out his phone and made a call right there. Yeah, it's Steve. I need you to set up family counseling for the Morris family, the best therapists we can find who specialize in family trauma and reunification. We're paying for it. As much as they need. For as long as they need it. He hung up and looked at Patricia and Thomas. You two have 40 years of pain to work through. You're going to need help. Professional help. People who know how to navigate this kind of reunion. And you're going to get it. He continued. And Thomas, I don't know what your financial situation is, but you mentioned you're retired. The Steve Harvey Foundation is setting up a fund to help with whatever you need. You're going to have the resources to build a relationship with your family, to make up for lost time. The Sullivan family, who had been watching all of this unfold in stunned silence, asked to speak. Their father, Robert Sullivan, stepped forward. Steve, Patricia, Thomas, all of us came here today expecting to play a game. But what we witnessed was so much more important than that. We're honored to have been here for this reunion, and we want to forfeit our chance at the prize money. The Morris family should have it all. Steve shook his head. That's generous, but not necessary. Both families are getting the full prize. This isn't about competition anymore. This is about community, about supporting people through something extraordinary. The taping was suspended. The game would never be completed. Instead, the production team decided to create a special episode focused entirely on Patricia and Thomas's reunion, their story, and the journey of healing that lay ahead. Over the next several hours, with cameras rolling, the family sat together, talking, crying, beginning the long process of rebuilding what had been lost. Jennifer got to meet her uncle for the first time in her 40 years of life. Brandon and Tyler heard stories about their great-grandmother and great-grandfather, got to know this great-uncle who had been missing their whole lives. Thomas shared photos of his life with David, of the home they had built in San Francisco, of the community they had been part of. Patricia showed him photos from the last 40 years, her wedding, Jennifer's childhood, her grandchildren growing up, their parents in their final years. Each photo was a window into a life Thomas had missed, and each one broke his heart a little more while also filling it with a bittersweet joy at seeing his family had thrived without him. When the special episode aired 6 weeks later, the response was overwhelming. The show received millions of messages from viewers who had been moved by the reunion. Many shared their own stories of estrangement from family members, of years of silence, of wondering about loved ones they had lost contact with, but perhaps more importantly, the episode sparked a national conversation about LGBTQ+ issues, about the very real fear and discrimination that had caused Thomas to flee in 1984, and about how far society had come while acknowledging how far there was still to go. Organizations that helped reconnect families reached out offering support. LGBTQ advocacy groups used the story to illustrate the real consequences of discrimination and rejection. Therapy practices that specialized in family reunification reported a surge in families reaching out to begin their own healing journeys. 6 months after the reunion, Patricia and Thomas were both in intensive family therapy, working through the complicated emotions of their situation. It wasn't easy. There were sessions where Patricia couldn't contain her anger, where she screamed at her brother for all the years he had stolen from their family. There were sessions where Thomas broke down with guilt, where the weight of what he had done threatened to crush him. But there were also breakthrough moments, moments where they laughed over shared memories from childhood, moments where Thomas got to know his niece and great-nephews, where he slowly became part of the family fabric, moments where Patricia could see past the pain to the scared 19-year-old boy who had made a terrible choice born of fear. 1 year after the reunion, the Morris family, now including Thomas, returned to Family Feud for a follow-up episode. The change was remarkable. While there was still obvious pain and work to be done, there was also genuine connection. Thomas and Patricia had developed a routine of having dinner together every Sunday. Thomas had become a regular presence at family gatherings, slowly earning his place back in the family he had abandoned. "It's not perfect," Patricia told Steve during the follow-up. "There are still days when I'm angry, when I think about everything we lost and I want to scream at him. But there are also days when I look at my brother and I'm just grateful he's alive, that we have this second chance. We're taking it day by day, with lots of help from our therapists." Thomas added, "I'll never forgive myself for what I did. I can't give them back the 40 years. But what I can do is be present now. I can be the brother, the uncle, the great-uncle they deserve going forward, and I can use my story to help other people, to tell them that running away doesn't solve anything, that family, real family, is worth the risk of being honest." He continued, emotion in his voice. "If there's anyone watching this who has cut off contact with their family, who's hiding who they really are because they're afraid of rejection, please don't make my mistake. Give your family the chance to surprise you. Give them the chance to love you for who you are. And if they don't, if they reject you, then at least you know. But don't rob yourself and them of 40 years based on fear. Don't let what happened to me happen to you." 5 years after the reunion, the Morris family had fully integrated Thomas back into their lives. He had moved into a small house just 2 blocks from Patricia's home. He was a regular at Brandon and Tyler's school events, sporting competitions, and family dinners. He had developed his own relationship with Jennifer, his niece, and had become a trusted confidant and source of wisdom for his great-nephews. The pain of the lost years never completely disappeared. There were still moments at family gatherings when someone would reference something from the past 40 years and Thomas would be reminded of what he had missed. There were still times when Patricia would look at her brother and feel a flash of anger at what his choice had cost them all. But there was also profound gratitude. Gratitude that they had found each other again, that they had been given this second chance, that the impossible reunion on a Family Feud stage had been the beginning of healing rather than just a brief moment of connection. Steve Harvey stayed in touch with the family over the years. He often referenced their story in interviews when talking about the power of Family Feud to create real moments, real connections, real healing. People think television is fake, he would say. They think everything is scripted or manipulated, but what happened with Patricia and Thomas, you can't script that. You can't manufacture that kind of emotion. That was real life happening in real time, and I was blessed to witness it and be part of their journey. 10 years after that April afternoon, Patricia was 72 years old and Thomas was 69. They had recovered a decade of the 40 years they had lost. Patricia had written a book about their experience titled, "The Brother I Thought I Lost: A Story of Fear, Loss, and Redemption." The book became a bestseller, not just for the compelling story, but for the honest way it dealt with complicated emotions, with anger and forgiveness, with the messiness of real reconciliation. In the book's conclusion, Patricia wrote, "People often ask me if I've forgiven my brother for what he did. The truth is, forgiveness isn't a one-time event. It's a choice I make every day. Some days it's easy, some days it's the hardest thing I do. But what I've learned is that forgiveness isn't about forgetting what happened or pretending it didn't hurt. Forgiveness is about choosing to move forward, to build something new even while acknowledging what was lost. My brother can never give me back the 40 years, but he can give me the present, and he can give me whatever future we have left. And I've decided that's enough." Thomas, in his own chapter of the book, wrote, "If I could go back to March 1984 and talk to my 19-year-old self, I would tell him that fear is a terrible compass. I would tell him that love is worth the risk of honesty. I would tell him that his family might surprise him, and even if they don't, living authentically is better than hiding in shame. But I can't go back. All I can do is be present now and try to make sure that other scared young people don't make the same mistakes I did. If my story prevents even one family from experiencing 40 years of unnecessary pain, then maybe some good can come from the terrible choice I made." The ripple effects of Patricia and Thomas's reunion continued to spread. Families who had been estranged found the courage to reach out. LGBTQ+ youth who were afraid to come out to their families used the story as a conversation starter. Therapists specializing in family reunification had more tools and resources thanks to the public documentation of Patricia and Thomas's healing journey. And Family Feud itself was forever changed. The show that had always been about fun and family took on a deeper significance. Producers and staff approached every family with the awareness that everyone had stories, everyone had pain, and sometimes being willing to pause, to listen, to let the unexpected happen, could create moments that mattered far more than any game. So before you click away from this extraordinary story, take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe to this channel, because stories like this remind us that miracles can happen in the most unexpected places. They show us that it's never too late to reconnect, never too late to heal, never too late to choose love over fear. Patricia and Thomas lost 40 years to fear, shame, and silence, but they recovered what they could and built something new from the rubble of what was lost. Their story challenges us to ask ourselves who we've lost contact with, what fears are keeping us from authentic connection, and whether we're willing to take the risk of honest vulnerability with the people we love. Because sometimes, in the middle of a game show taping, in a random moment that no one could have predicted, we get a second chance at something we thought was lost forever. And when that miracle happens, the only question that matters is, what will we do with it? Patricia and Thomas chose healing over bitterness, connection over isolation, and hope over despair. And in doing so, they showed us all that family, real family, is worth fighting for, even when the fight is 40 years in the making.